Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Wine Pair Podcast. I'm Joe, your sommelier of reasonably priced wine, and for these special episodes, I give Carmela a break so that she can take care of the work she has to do at her bakery, Baby Cakes. And I get the chance to talk to real winemakers to understand their history and their craft and all that other fun stuff. Today we get to talk to a winemaking couple, Brian and Jessica Smith, who are just starting out in the winemaking business in a place you may not expect people to make wine, and that's in the great state of Kansas. Yeah, I said Kansas. It may be surprising to hear that Brian and Jessica are making wine in Kansas, but there's a great story behind it, and they are not the only ones. And what is great about this episode is that we get to talk to people who are passionate about what they're doing and learning every day. And to be clear, they do have some history and DNA that helped them to start this quest, but I'll let you hear that from Brian and Jessica yourselves in just a minute. First, as a quick orientation to what we usually do in the Wine Pair Podcast, in most episodes, we learn about, taste, and review 2 wines that are reasonably priced, which means under $25 and should be easy to find. However, for this special set of episodes, we interview people who are involved in actually making wine, because part of what we want to do with our podcast is to educate ourselves and you on different aspects of wine knowledge in a fun, entertaining, and unstuffy way. Even fun and entertaining, as Decanter Magazine has called our podcast. And that is what we're doing today. A small plug before we get to the interview with Brian and Jessica. If you like what you're hearing or are interested in hearing our other regular episodes, please subscribe to or follow our podcast so you can hear more, especially since you're only getting one half of the Wine Pair Podcast in this episode. You can also go to our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, to send us a note or subscribe to our newsletter. And you can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky and TikTok at the Wine Pair Podcast. And if you like what you're hearing, you can even leave us a nice rating and review. We won't mind one little bit. But with that, let's get on to the interview with Brian and Jessica. Hi, Brian and Jessica, and welcome to the Wine Pair Podcast.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, we're so excited to have you and share with our listeners the story of how you guys started your own winery, what you've learned, the wines you're starting to make, and all sorts of other fun things. So I think we should just jump in.
Yeah, let's do it. We're excited to share everything.
Okay, so let's just start with a little bit about the both of you, your background, your families, and if wine played any part in your history or growing up.
Yeah, I'll start. So we've been married 20-something years now. We met in college. I'm originally from New Orleans. Jessica is originally from an area called Salt Creek Valley, Kansas, which is about 30 minutes outside of Kansas City, northeast part of the state. A beautiful area, not flat like you would imagine most of Kansas is. And like I said, we met at college, and we're kind of in the corporate world for most of our adult life. For me anyway, wine wasn't really a growing up thing. I didn't grow up in the industry. Didn't even grow up in agriculture. I grew up, like I said, in New Orleans and then Kansas City. So kind of a suburb guy. And how we both sort of got into wine, I think about like a trip that we did to Maui. And neither of us were real big, heavy wine drinkers. And like I said, wasn't part of growing up. And we had just got kind of sick of everything else. And one morning we woke up, it's a 5-hour time difference from where we're at. We woke up and said, let's have mimosas on the beach. Like, that sounds amazing, right? Mimosas on the beach in Hawaii. And we went out, and as we started drinking mimosas on the beach, for both of us, it was, okay, a little bit less orange juice this time, a little bit less orange juice this time. And before you knew it, it was just like, wow, this Prosecco is really good. One thing led to another. And I think, by 10 a.m. on a Sunday, we're dancing on the beach, and there's families there. And it's like, wow, this got away from us. And we sort of came to the realization, like, hey, we kind of like wine. Like, maybe this is something we should kind of explore with. And so that sort of led to, well, let's book a trip out to California and do wine tasting. And one thing led to another. And now we've tried all sorts of different, places around the country and even a few internationally. And that's, for me anyway, sort of what led us into like the whole world of wine and wine tasting and exploring and the different adventures you can go on with wine.
Well, I think what I've just learned is I want to go on trips with you guys. If you're by 10 o'clock in the morning, you're just all the way just to plain champagne or Prosecco.
We've grown a little since then, but there have been a few wine trips that have gotten out of hand, for sure. But yeah, we've definitely grown since then. They would it's probably more food than wine now, but we definitely enjoy our vacations and our trips to wine countries.
I guess, like I said, we're coming with you. Okay, well, you found this love for wine, and now you've turned it into winemaking. So, how did that happen? Clearly, it wasn't something you had sort of started out interested in. So, how did you get there?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't something that we started out doing. And I tell Jessica quite a bit, like she does a good job of tempering my crazy dreams and my, the odd things I try and dig into. So this is certainly one of them where part of me thought, maybe she'll talk me off this ledge, but she sort of jumped in too. Both parents can't be crazy all the time, but this is one where I think we did. Like I said, for years, 20 something years, I was in the corporate world. And towards the end of that, it was a lot of international travel. And I can remember it was in February of 2020, I was in a hotel in Bangalore, like live streaming my son's senior year wrestling tournament. And I just kind of thought to myself, like, what am I doing? Like what, all the things I'm missing out on. So we came back from that, and that was right when COVID hit and the world just sort of shut down. And so I was fortunate enough to be forced to work from home all summer and the rest of the year. And that's sort of what led to I've got to find something else to do. Like this corporate ladder climbing just isn't fit. I didn't feel it any, I wasn't passionate about it anymore. And so, and we live on a bunch of acreage, her parents' farm, and they have a huge farm. And so we have a portion of that. And I thought, well, gosh, I wonder if we could grow grapes out here. And that started with researching the history of wine in Kansas. And is this even possible? And we knew absolutely nothing about the grape growing side. And so that started this obsession of, like, do we even have the soil for it? And what we sort of discovered is in the 1800s, Kansas was a major wine growing state. And so that was like a total, like, oh, wow. And then when my son went to college, most of the colleges in the country were going with remote online classes. And so I sort of thought, I wonder if I could like get a degree in this just going to class online. So, at the age of 41, I re-enrolled in college and started piecing together classes from universities that were offering online courses all over the country. And so one thing led to another, and it was like, okay, this is something we could probably do. And I'm going to school to learn it. And so in 2021, we planted our first 2 acres, and then we just kept doing classes and checking off the certificates. And by 2025, we were now 4 years into it. We have four acres planted. We just bottled our first vintage. And before we knew it, we had gone over a relatively short period into being in this corporate America world to this crazy story of having a vineyard and winery in the state of Kansas. So that was sort of like how we jumped into the vineyard and winemaking side of things.
So it's kind of amazing. Yeah. And in a minute, we'll go into some of your wines, but I think the whole Kansas piece is really interesting. Like, I think that's something that most people don't know, that you can even make wine or grow wine grapes in Kansas. So I always like to find out, you obviously were taking online classes and those kinds of things, but was there a mentor or somebody who like kind of helped you along or showed you the ropes? And is there a community in Kansas or around you of other people who are growing grapes or making wines that you can lean on?
There is. And actually, I would kind of maybe tell it in 2 ways. There's a community in Kansas. It's relatively small. There are about 30 to 40 wineries in Kansas. And the state of Kansas does a pretty good job of trying to support what they call specialty crop agriculture or ag tourism. And a lot of it falls under ag tourism. And so there's a community in Kansas, and they've been great. Everybody that we've reached out to here has been great. But I would actually, maybe talk more about 2 of the mentors that I would say have kind of mentored us. One of the things that we sort of set out to do is, one of the regions that we fell in love with was the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And so on one of our trips, we went and we stayed in McMinnville, in a little place in McMinnville. The reason we chose that is because when I was doing research about the types of grapes, so they're very different. And some of your previous guests have talked about that. With the French hybrids that we grow here, there's a variety in particular called Seyval. And that variety stuck out to me. And I thought, well, based on the descriptions, it sounds like this would be a good one. And I wonder if there are people who have done anything with this. There's a winery in, I think it's Newburgh, that's called Bells Up. And this guy had won some awards with his Save-All. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, would you be interested in could we come up there and just kind of see how you do things? And this is very, very early on. And the guy's name's Dave, and he invited us out there, and we went and spent a little bit of time with him. And he loved the idea, hey, you're going to try and do this, recreate this in Kansas. And he said, yeah, I found online that you've won some awards with your Save-All. And so he's been really, really great about answering just off the wall questions hey, on your Save-All, what do you, when you harvest, what are you harvesting? What's your pH at? What's your acidity at? Or what bricks are you picking at? And so, and I've told him hey, if I could just recreate what you did, and he jokingly hey, we'll never compete, but Dave from Bells Up has been really, he probably doesn't even know. He would probably tell you, I only answer a few emails from the guy. But his story of leaving corporate America and starting a winery out in Oregon, and the way they do it, only do tastings with the winemakers so that, the experience is super high end. And so Dave has been one that's been really, really, I would consider kind of a mentor in this space. And the other one is Kim Coleman, who you may or may not have heard of. Coleman Winery. It's also out there. It's 10, 15 minutes, I think, from McMinnville. That's another one that we've gone out there and spent some time with, and their winemaker, how do you do this? How do you do that? So it's sort of a combination of taking what we can do in the varieties that we have in Kansas and getting feedback from the winemakers here, and then overlaying the lens of what's going on in Oregon, and are there viticulture practices we can apply or winemaking practices we can apply. So between those two, it's really been sort of helpful in guiding us to figure out how to kind of navigate the world of winemaking in Kansas.
So super interesting. And you had no background in winemaking, and I'm assuming you didn't have any or much of a background in farming, because for most winemakers, they have to also be farmers. Now, Jessica, your family has farmland in Kansas. So did you have any background? Was there a way that you were able to sort of drop into the planting crops, et cetera, that made it a little bit maybe easier than it could have been if you had no background?
I would say for sure, yes. I mean, I was not directly involved in planting crops or harvesting crops, but I grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer, and he still is a farmer. Farmers, I don't know that they ever retire, but he's still a farmer. He grows corn and soybeans. We had pigs growing up. So yeah, full on farm life. So I would say most of what I could apply is I just know how hard working people are. And, it's a lot of work. It's whether you're growing grapes or corn or soybeans or whatever it is. I knew going into this that it was going to be a lot of work.
She does a really good job of no, it's planting season, or you've got to spray, or so I never have to convince her the agricultural side, or Joe, it'll be, hey, I need to go get this tool. And she'd say, well, don't buy the cheap one. My dad would say, don't buy the cheap one. You have to buy the right tool. And so it's not like I have to sell her on some of the farming agricultural stuff. She grew up with that and kind of gets that part of it.
Right. But definitely not grapes. I never thought I would be involved in grape growing.
A grape farmer.
Did your father think you guys were nuts?
Yeah, I think so.
It's interesting because we use a lot of his equipment to move stuff around. And when we first told him about it, he was like, what? You could grow grapes around here. And later on, I'll tell you why we chose the name that we did and the relevance there. But after seeing our first harvest, he has said, there's some stuff over here by the pond. There's some land over here that I use as pasture land that if you need to grow a little bit, I'm not using that land for anything. So, and I've noticed he'll come over and harvest, and he'll come over and check the crops, and we'll talk more about different pests and things like that than we used to, for sure.
That's a secret weapon, for sure. Somebody with that kind of experience. And I think people who are wine drinkers often forget, because wine has the connotation of being sort of fancy and it's fundamentally it's a crop that,
Right.
is made into a drink. And there's a lot of hard work and dirt and muck and all that kind of stuff that's involved in it.
It's one of the things that I think sort of, I don't know that I would say separates, but maybe defines us a little bit in terms of the winemaking, which is every time we would go out and talk to one of the winemakers out in Oregon, and I'll just use Oregon as an example, there is this obsession with the fruit itself and the quality. And the ones that really stick out are ones that they could tell you everything about the variety that they've grown, the rainfall that they've gotten, and why it would impact the taste palette, and all that type of stuff. There's this obsession about it. And I think that kind of comes a little bit inherent in what we do. It's like, I don't want to have 15 varieties and do all these different things. And we want to have a few varieties and get as good as we can with the varieties that we plant. And so that's a little bit different, I think, maybe in our approaches. We want to just be obsessed with the varieties that we have and see if we can make them as good as we can.
Yeah, let's keep going down this path because I think this is an area that's going to be really interesting. When you were seeking to make your wines, did you have like a style or an approach or something that you wanted to create in terms of defining what kinds of wine you wanted to make?
It might be different for both of us. I'll answer a little bit and then you can weigh in. I sort of went down the path of trying to recreate what I think Jessica would like. And so I go back to that story in Hawaii where we first started drinking Prosecco. And I thought, selfishly, like, man, if my wife likes this, if I could figure out a way to make that, like, I'd be a rock star. And so with the first variety that we chose, the Seyval, is that something that I could recreate to kind of impress my wife? Right. And that was sort of like my approach of trying to think of creating the wines that I think she would like.
Yeah. And I think, we both kind of like similar style of wine, like a drier wine. We definitely are not sweet wine drinkers, so you're not going to find that. And we want to kind of really let the wine speak for itself. Like we're not trying to add a bunch. We're not trying to change the taste of it. We want it really to come through, and you're tasting the wine that was grown here, the grapes that were grown.
Terroir.
The terroir.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Terroir it's a great term. But let's talk about what kinds of grapes, because this is one of the things that motivated me a little bit in why I wanted to start the podcast with Carmela. And that was like, everything was Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay. And that's because California it's quite good at growing Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay and some other grapes. But, when you go to other wine regions like Virginia or New York or, even in Oregon, parts of Washington State or Michigan, like you can't force the grape into the land. You have to go with what grows there and really does well. So how do you think about that, the types of grapes? And you talked about Seyval, but like, are there other grapes that you grow or want to grow?
Yeah. So we have 4 different varieties planted, 2 white and 2 red. And, one of the challenges I think that you have in Kansas is, and I get asked this quite a bit when we started this, is, well, like, are you going to make good wine? Like, I get that question a lot, like, no, I'm going to intentionally not make good wine. But I'll ask, well, like, what does good wine mean to you? And they'll say, oh, well, I love California Cabs. I say, well, you can't make that here. That's not the type of grapes. That's not the varieties that will work here. If you want a California Cab, the best place to get that is California. And so if you can think about a little bit, the French hybrids are what grow best around here. And there are some that plant vinifera and make it work. But the French hybrids are the ones that are the most successful here. And so if you start with that, and there's tons of them, if you start with that as like the top of the funnel of what you can choose from, what I believe, and I think there's probably some science to back this up, is Kansas is a growing region. You get some pretty decent wet springs, but then you get heat, and you get heat the whole growing season, and you get a lot of sun the whole growing season. And what that sets you up for is, your fruit ripens a little bit earlier. You have a little bit higher acids and stuff because you have a shorter but hot growing season. So like this part of the country could be amazing at doing a sparkling, at doing a good white wine. And so when we started, that was the first thing that we wanted to do is, well, and it's a little bit easier, it's a little bit more forgiving to start with a white wine if you're a new winemaker. So we picked out two varieties, our Save-All that I've talked about, and then a variety called Frontenac Gris, which I believe came out of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. And I had tried a Frontenac Gris. It's very versatile. You can do a lot of different things with it, but it has more depth probably than you would imagine. And so those are the first two varieties that we planted. When we harvested, we did our Frontenac Gris as a still Gris style wine. And I think it probably surprised us both post-fermentation, like that first taste out of the tank post-fermentation. We kind of looked at each other and like, did we make this? Like, is this like for your first time? It's not bad. And so I think we were both a little bit surprised at how good the Gris turned out. And then on the red side, we went with a similar, same, but variety called the Frontenac Noir. And then the state here grows a lot of Chambourcin. And I believe the gentleman you had on from Virginia also has a Chambourcin. And so those are the two that we went with on the red sides. And so Chambourcin is sort of like the all-star of the state, I would say. There's a lot of folks in the state that grow Chambourcin. And I think if done well, if you kind of implement the same practices that you have there in the Pacific Northwest, you can get a really good, I would say probably medium-bodied Pinot style red out of those varieties. And so we planted those a little bit later in the year. So those will come online next leaf will be our first harvest. But you're sort of, so it's sort of, if you think about it from an artist, you're a little bit like, these are the paints that you start with. It's not just an unlimited supply. And then what you can do with those, like those ingredients to create.
And so now you're starting to release your first wines. So what about them are you excited about? You're talking about some wines that are going to come out later. Tell us a little bit about the wines that you're creating.
So we only have one wine in the bottle right now. So we are the most excited about that one. And I think that for the folks, it's hard for me to say, oh, it's amazing, or it's because I'm like, obviously I think it's great because, there's a part of me in it. The folks that we've given it to that I would say, not my parents think anything we do are amazing, right? But some of the folks that we've had come over to do tastings, and it has a lot more depth for a white than I think I originally thought it would. I think we set out to create a light, crisp, something you could just chill and have on a Sunday on the porch kind of a wine. But I think it has a little bit more complexity than we had thought it would, than we expected it to. And I think some of the folks who have tried it really enjoy it as like a dinner wine more than I think we thought it would. Mm-hmm. And so it's still a light white wine, but it has a depth and complexity that I don't think like we didn't expect. It was kind of a happy surprise. And I think some of that comes from a lot of folks in the state, and a lot of the feedback that we got was using commercial, like just starting with commercial yeast, because, like that's just the next step in the process. And by accident, would you say? Yeah. After we pressed and had it in tanks, it started to ferment just with native yeast. So instead of like panicking, it's like, well, let's let it go on native yeast for a little bit before we introduce some commercial yeast. And I think next year, and I think that probably gave it a little bit of the complexity. And certainly then when we introduced the commercial, it gave it a little bit of the aromas. It's got a real kind of tropical fruit aroma to it. And so that was surprising. I think next year what we'll probably try is in this part of the state anyway, with kind of all the growth and vegetation around here, I think we'll probably let it go on native yeast and see, and maybe split some off and do it in 2 lots and see. But I think we'll probably let it go on native yeast and see what kind of flavors that gives us.
This is a kind of an interesting segue, because one of the questions I always like to ask of winemakers is, do you lean more on the art or the science? And I know it's both. Like, it's both. You have to be able to do both. But it sounds like even early on in the winemaking, you're kind of playing with both of these with the native yeast. It's a little bit like art, but you also have to know a lot of the science behind it.
It was definitely, let's start with the science approach. And hey, here's what all the textbooks say, and here's what I learned. And then I think once you get your hands dirty, and maybe it's just because the lack of experience, it very quickly turns into art. And I think a little bit with, like I said, I come from New Orleans where food and music and art all sort of intertwine. And that's very big in my family. And so I think I just more naturally leaned into the art side of things. And, we still do things that you kind of testing your sulfur number, or testing your SO2 numbers and things like that. But it's been a little bit more of the art behind things. We took some stuff and said, hey, let's try a French oak barrel. And so we ordered this little mini French oak barrel just to kind of like play and see what that would create and how that would work. And so I sort of describe it as, it's kind of tries to be science-based, but maybe art by accident you don't have the science skills with all the experience. So you art your way through things, and it turns out what you've created at the end is a painting that you're pretty happy with.
Yeah, love it. You are on very much a learning journey. So what do you think the both of you have been learning along the way as you've gone into this very brave adventure?
One of the big things we learned is, well, we sort of knew, and you haven't talked about the name yet, but going into this, we knew that there was some history in my family of winemaking in Kansas, but we've found out so much more. We found out much more information about my fifth great grandfather, Wendelin, who actually had one of the biggest vineyards in Kansas back before Prohibition. But we went even further from there, and we traveled to Germany last year to find sort of his roots in Germany, and found that actually they're still growing grapes in that area. Our ancestors that didn't move, that stayed in Germany, are still growing grapes there, and got to meet them and see the vineyards and things like that. It's been very amazing, that part of the journey.
You find you become a history buff as you get older, like you become super history nerds. My learnings, it's a totally different. I have learned that this is like the perfect career choice for somebody with ADD, like myself. You have 3 different businesses. You have an agricultural vineyard business, you have a winemaking business, and you have a whole retail tasting room, the consumer side of things business. And so I for somebody like me who just like struggles at time to focus and concentrate, I will be in the morning out looking at trying to, diagnose fungus on a leaf or mildew on berries. And then 2 hours later, trying to figure out how you're putting tanks together and how you're like the right fittings for different tanks and why this pump isn't working and why you're getting air injected here. And then later on in the afternoon, you're solving e-commerce problems and why you can't ship to the state of Ohio because the tax rate you don't have set up correctly. And so for somebody like me to be able to just like move around 3 different businesses all in the same day. And when you get frustrated with something, you're like, I'm done with this for the day. Well, there's something else you can kind of dig your mind into. And then like, oh, yeah. Oh, now I figured out in my head how to go fix that other thing. And so that's been a big learning for me.
Jessica, you started talking a little bit about the name. So tell us a little bit more about where the name came from. Not
to steal your thunder, Jessica, you mentioned it a little bit. I don't know that she does enough justice to her and her family on what we had here. So when we started the winery, when we started the vineyard, we obviously had to come up with a name. And we knew that the history of her family, her great-great-grandfather, 4 generations, 5 generations back, was an entrepreneur in Kansas in the 1870s. And as we did more research, we discovered that at one point, he had the largest vineyard in the state of Kansas back in the 1870s before Prohibition. And they were producing over 6,000 cases a year of wine. And most of it, maybe not even most of it, but a large portion of it was sold as sacramental wine across the state. And so when we came up with that, we were like, oh my gosh, this would be great. Like, let's name it after him. And his name was Wendelin Vines. And so that was our initial, we thought that would be a cool marketing idea, and it ties back to her family. And we did a bunch of research about how, they started in Kansas and all this. And that led to, well, I wonder what part of Germany they came from. And so she started doing some research and found cousins that still live in the region that Wendelin and his family migrated from in Germany. So last November, we made a trip over there. And as we were walking through this town, and her cousin, Marcus Hunt. And as Marcus was going through the village, and he would point out, this is where their family left from, and this is the church they were baptized. At one point, he said, would you like to see, the Hun vineyard? And we both sort of looked at each other like, the Huns still own a vineyard? And he said, oh yeah, we still own vines and we still make wine today. And the Hun family in Baden, Germany, in Waldem still makes wine today. And it blew us away that, and now we say like, well, Jessica's a fifth generation winemaker with kind of a 4th generation back. And so because of that, and our labels are all embossed with the portrait of Wendelin Hun on the label. And that's become kind of a rallying point for us as we've learned more and more about their family history and their history of winemakers here in Kansas in the 1800s, but even going back to the 1500s in Germany.
That's such a great story. I mean, you had it in your blood, you just didn't know it. That's what it was. Yeah. You discovered it. It came out. It had to happen. Well, that's an awesome story. We have, but I have a very important question now. Brian, it sounds like the both of you have come out to the Pacific Northwest, but I'm not sure how much you've been to Seattle. You've been around Seattle, but next time you come out, you got to let us know, and we will invite you over to Sunday night dinner, and that's a big deal. I just want you to know it's a big deal. Italian-American family, we take that very seriously. So when you come to Sunday night dinner, the only thing that we ask, I mean, you're welcome, like, you don't have to do anything special except bring us your wine. So what wine are you going to bring us?
Ooh, what would you suggest, Jessica?
Well, hopefully maybe the sparkling.
That's what I was going to say.
I was hoping you would say that.
I think that what we tried to do with our sparkling is we tried to make it like a Prosecco style sparkling. And so I think that would go perfect as the starting point to a large Italian family dinner.
And we always think about, like, when Carmela and I think about wine, and usually when we talk about wine, we talk a lot about how it pairs with food. Do you think about that a lot in terms of how you're thinking about making wines too?
I don't know that we would set out to say, let's make a wine that would pair good with pork, or let's make a wine that would pair good with this. I think after the fact, what I've found is we're more along the lines of, ooh, this would taste really good with this. And as silly as it sounds, one of the things that's become like a staple for us is drinking a sparkling with the salt and vinegar kettle chips. It has become, we try and dress it up as a fancy, like, oh, you've got to try this. And so if we're responsible for the appetizer, you would expect a sparkling and some real high-end salt and vinegar kettle chips.
We're totally with you. We used to have that approach of sparkling wines being for just special occasions. And now we're like, the special occasion is Tuesday. So, you can have sparkling wine anytime. It's great. It's great with food. It's great with all sorts of things.
It pairs perfectly with food you would find at the county fair, surprisingly.
Actually, that's true. Fried foods. Like, I've never tried it with a corn dog, but I have a feeling it might be awesome.
a little Kansas twist to your sparkling wine.
For sure. Okay, before we let you go, we want to let our listeners know how they can find you, how they get your wines, if they want to visit. What does that look like? So tell us that.
Yeah, so we're located in Northeast Kansas. We're about 35 minutes from downtown Kansas City. We're about 20 minutes from the airport. So it's a pretty quick drive from the airport. So our website is wendelinvines.com, and our Facebook page is Wendelin Vines. We just launched last week the shipping side of our site. So we can ship to 40-something states in the country now, probably like most places. And so if you're in and around Kansas City, you can ping us on our website. Most of what we do is private tastings. We have a barn here that was built in the late 1800s. It's our tasting room. And we talk a little bit about Wendelin and the history of wine in Kansas, a little bit of a drunk history of Kansas kind of approach. So it's fun. But those are probably the best ways to either try the wine or when you come out and do a tasting here with us.
Well, that sounds perfect. And we'll have this information in our show notes and we'll repeat it again before we sign off. And I'll just say one last thing. What I'm hoping too is that we have a chance to connect again when the Chiefs play the Seahawks in the Super Bowl this year. How about that?
I look forward to the day when we're back in the Super Bowl, but I'm also grateful for the 4 or 5 that we've been in recently.
I think it could happen fast. He's back. Patrick's back. So.
Yeah. We're holding out for Taylor and Travis to come do a tasting. That's when we know Wolf made it, when Wendelin Vines and the Chiefs, when we have Taylor and Travis come out and taste.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. We have had such a good time talking to you.
All right, well, Joe, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
It was great meeting you face to face.
Good luck with graduation.
Good luck with graduation.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Well, thank you very much for listening to our interview with Brian and Jessica and hearing their amazing story. It's so fascinating to hear about the discovery they made of the history of winemaking in their family and how they're bringing winemaking back to life in Kansas. We're really excited to see how this adventure plays out over the next few years, and we will definitely be paying attention and giving you all updates. Now, in case you're worried about how to get in touch with Brian and Jessica or finding Wendelin Vines, don't worry. You can find out all of this information on our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, in our show notes for this episode. But so you have it, here again is the information about how to find out more. The website is wendelinvines.com, WendelinVines.com. Facebook is Wendelin Vines, and email is brian@wendelinvines.com. And we hope you'll subscribe to our podcast, The Wine Pair Podcast, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok and Blue Sky, and visit our website, thewinepairpodcast.com, where you can reach out to us and sign up for our newsletter. And you can also always reach out to me at joe@thewinepairpodcast.com if you want more information, you have other winemakers you want to introduce us to, or you want to share what you've been drinking. We look forward to hearing from you. But for now, it's time to go. And as we like to say, life is short, so stop drinking shitty wine. Bye-bye.
Too much.